China slapped an additional 15% import tax on American farm products, including pork, poultry, beef, and soybeans.
Yeah, Liz, it's kind of hard to pay attention at home to all the tiny steps that we have seen already in this tariffs trade war. And so far, we've really been talking about 3 trading partners, the biggest ones, Canada, Mexico, and China. And as you mentioned, China's retaliatory tariffs on American exports kicked in today.
Who pays for all the tariffs? For example, I spoke to 2 suppliers who said that their customer, Walmart, has been putting more pressure on them to take on all the costs. And they've been telling me that it's just so difficult, if not impossible, for them to take on a now 20% tariff. They said this is on top of the Trump 1.0 tariffs.
The U.S. never saw it coming. China has unleashed a ruthless counterstrike. In a stunning escalation, Beijing has blocked 15 American companies from critical Chinese technologies and slapped new tariffs on U.S. energy exports. The message is loud and clear. China won't back down. With tensions at an all-time high, is this the moment the trade war spirals out of control? And as panic spreads through Washington, one question remains: how will the U.S. respond? Join us today as we break it all down. But before diving in, like this video and subscribe for more insights on the latest geopolitical updates. China strikes back at Trump tariffs with 15% levies.
Trade and tariff wars have no winners. What is needed are not more tariffs, but dialogue. We urge the U.S. to correct its action and stop weaponizing trade issues.
China has rebelled against President Donald Trump's aggressive tariffs, unleashing a 15% tax on vital American agricultural exports, including chicken, pork, soybeans, and beef. As tensions in the trade war spiral, Wall Street trembled on Monday, with investors hastily pulling their money, fearing the devastating economic fallout of Trump's escalating tariff battles.
How much will the
We're thinking about that too. We're talking about a tariff of 10% on China based on the fact that they're sending fentanyl to Mexico and Canada.
The Chinese government's retaliatory strike, unveiled last week, was a direct counterpunch to Trump's decision to double tariffs on Chinese imports to 20% as of March 4th. In a rare concession, China's Commerce Ministry announced that goods already en route would be spared from the retaliatory tariffs, though only until April 12th. Tariffs on foreign goods remain a cornerstone of Trump's hardline economic strategy. He insists these steep import taxes will fill U.S. government coffers, shield domestic industries from foreign competition, and force global powers to bend to his will on a range of contentious issues, including immigration and drug trafficking.
We'll have some good meetings with China. We have meetings planned, and we'll see what happens. But that was just an opening salvo. If we can't make a deal with China, then the tariffs will be very, very substantial.
Now, Trump is preparing to escalate even further. On Wednesday, he will strip away exceptions on the 25% steel tariffs first imposed in 2018, while simultaneously hiking aluminum tariffs from 10% to 25%. Last week, in rapid-fire succession, Trump slapped tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports, only to delay many of them for 30 days. But his next move could shake global trade even more. Next month, he may roll out reciprocal tariffs, a sweeping policy designed to match the steep import taxes imposed by foreign governments on U.S. goods.
They're not seemingly trying to escalate. They're not getting into a war of words, not, saying Donald Trump's, this, that, or calling him names or anything like that. So they're just waiting and watching. I think they came to the realization you cannot control Donald Trump. You can just simply prepare.
Economists are sounding the alarm, warning that these tariffs will inevitably drive up costs for American consumers while stifling innovation among U.S. companies shielded from global competition. Retaliation remains a looming threat, with America's farmers, one of Trump's most loyal voting blocs, becoming an obvious target. During Trump's first-term trade wars, Beijing has wielded tariffs against American farm products, delivering a severe blow to the agricultural sector. U.S. farm exports to China plummeted, only to see a fragile recovery after a 2020 truce when China pledged to ramp up purchases. But the rebound was short-lived. American farm exports to China soared to $38 billion in 2022, only to tumble to $29 billion in 2023 and an even steeper decline to $25 billion last year. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the downward spiral continued into January 2024, when exports alone plunged 56% from the same period a year before. To soften the financial devastation, Trump funneled tens of billions of taxpayer dollars to farmers to compensate for their losses. But as the trade war reignites, the question looms: how much longer can America's farmers afford to be caught in the crossfire? There are no winners in a trade war.
We are firmly opposed to this unwarranted increase, and we do believe that this is in violation of the WTO rules. So that's why China is filing a complaint at the WTO. And let me also emphasize that there is no winner in a trade war.
China has unleashed a fierce rebuke against the Trump administration's escalating trade war. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian condemned the tariff hikes as a reckless battle that should not be fought and cannot be won. But as tensions mount, the real question remains: who will blink first? Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao matched the defiant tone, declaring, "Coercion and threats will not work on China, nor will they scare China." His warning was unmistakable. China's determination to defend its interests is unswerving. There are no winners in a trade war.
We will never accept pressure and threats, and will resolutely safeguard our national sovereignty, security, and development interests.
Since taking office in January, the Trump administration has raised tariffs on Chinese imports twice, triggering swift retaliation from Beijing. The rift between the world's two largest economies deepens with every new duty and restriction. Wang made it clear: China will not back down. If the American side goes further down this wrong path, we will continue to respond in kind, he vowed. We will fight to the end. Despite mounting economic challenges, China is doubling down on global expansion. Wang acknowledged the pressure on Chinese exporters, but revealed that Beijing is aggressively pushing companies to enter international trade shows and expand their reach. Meanwhile, the government is ramping up financial support for export credit, betting on trade in services and e-commerce. We do not put all our eggs in one basket, he said. But is China's strategy enough to weather the storm?
China hit back at the U.S. with retaliatory tariffs. Beijing doing this in response, of course, to President Trump's 10% tariff on Chinese imports.
A position of strength as it looks to potentially negotiate with the U.S. this week on these additional tariffs. Of course, these tariffs will have an impact on Chinese businesses, although we often hear the perspective that it's U.S. businesses, it's U.S. consumers that pay the brunt of these tariffs.
Domestically, China's economy faces an uphill battle. A struggling housing market, sluggish stock performance, weak social welfare, and lingering job losses from the COVID-19 pandemic have slowed growth. The head of the National Development and Reform Commission, Zheng Xianjie, admitted that 2025 economic forecasts hover between 4.6% and 4.8%, falling short of the government's ambitious around 5% target. To counter this slowdown, Zheng revealed that Beijing is drafting a specialized plan of action to stimulate consumer spending and investment. Details remain scarce, but one thing is clear: China is preparing to dig deep. Finance Minister Lan Foan pledged stronger support for struggling local governments and massive investments in education, social security, and healthcare. We will make sure that every coin is well spent, he assured, emphasizing that the central government has left ample room for policy to be implemented. China cuts off key U.S. companies.
If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one.
China has struck back forcefully against the United States, placing 15 American companies on its export control list, effectively cutting them off from crucial Chinese dual-use technologies. At the same time, it has added 10 more U.S. companies to its unreliable entity list, escalating tensions in the ongoing trade war. One of the most significant casualties is U.S. medical equipment giant Illumina, now facing an outright ban on the import of its genetic sequencers into China. The move comes as two of its major Chinese competitors, MGI and BGI, were included in a U.S. bill to restrict business with multiple biotech firms on national security grounds. Julian Evans Pritchard, head of China economics at Capital Economics, analyzed Beijing's counterstrike, stating that China's response was designed to send a message that they're not going to be pushed around, but at the same time calibrate their response in the hopes of trying to avoid escalating things further.
And China's very smart. They've picked U.S. exports that are very sensitive to U.S. firms, and you can be sure that those firms are giving an earful to Mr. Trump right now.
China established import taxes on American fossil fuel products by placing 15% fees on coal imports and liquefied natural gas while applying a 10% duty on crude oil imports. Any organization importing U.S. fossil fuels now requires payment of the new tax, which drives up operation costs for businesses using American energy supplies. China, the world's largest coal importer, relies primarily on Indonesia for its coal needs. Russia, Australia, and Mongolia also play key roles as suppliers. China has enacted a steady growth pattern in U.S. LNG imports since 2018, based on information from Chinese customs. China consumes minimal U.S. fossil fuels compared to its overall energy distribution. In 2023, only 1.7% of its imported crude oil came from America, making Washington's latest tariffs little more than an empty threat. Trade economist Rebecca Harding warns that Beijing has no shortage of alternatives, with Russia eagerly offloading discounted oil to fund its war effort. Meanwhile, the U.S., as the world's largest LNG exporter, has no shortage of buyers in Europe and the U.K. But this trade war isn't just about energy. In February, China struck back with a 10% tariff on U.S. agricultural machinery, pickup trucks, and large cars. Yet, with most of its vehicle imports coming from Europe and Japan, the impact on Chinese consumers will be negligible. At the same time, Beijing has been aggressively investing in its domestic farm machinery industry, using tariffs not just as retaliation, but as a calculated move to fortify its production and food security.
Which is 30 billion, which is already known.
History has shown that China and the United States benefit from cooperation but suffer from confrontation.
And China's counteroffensive doesn't stop at tariffs. It has now turned its sights on American tech, launching an anti-monopoly probe into Google. While details remain scarce, the search giant has been blocked in China since 2010, with only a minor presence through app distribution. If China cuts ties completely, the financial blow to Google would be minimal, but the message to Washington is crystal clear. The trade war is escalating. The question is, who will blink first?
Now, the US-China chip war is all set to escalate. Now, China has decided to restrict exports of two metals that are crucial in producing not only semiconductors, but also telecom devices and electric vehicles.
Beyond import restrictions, China has also imposed stringent export controls on 25 rare metals, which are crucial for global electronics and military production. China dominates the refinement of these critical materials, accounting for nearly 90% of the world's total refined output. Tungsten is part of the new restricted list because it is difficult to secure and is critical for aerospace manufacturing. The export regulations implemented by Beijing specifically target metal products but do not affect China's import of crucial metals used to create high-end semiconductors, aerospace technology, and pharmaceuticals. Standards from previous situations indicate that export levels will drop dramatically as companies face extensive delays in obtaining import permits through an examination process, which usually takes multiple weeks. Meanwhile, to secure its supply of rare earth metals, the U.S. has turned to Ukraine, offering a $300 billion support package in exchange for guarantees on metal shipments. However, those negotiations have hit a major roadblock following a contentious and fractured meeting between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. With economic weapons deployed on both sides, the global trade war shows no signs of easing. How much further will the U.S. and China push before the consequences become too great to bear? Rubio says USAID purge is complete, with 83% of the agency's programs gone.
Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the cuts at USAID are done, leaving the aid agency with only about 16% of its original program. That's an elimination of more than 5,000 contracts.
In a sweeping and unprecedented overhaul, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced Monday that the Trump administration has completed its 6-week purge of programs under the 6-decade-old U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, slashing a staggering 83% of its operations. Declaring the end of an era in American foreign aid, Rubio confirmed that the surviving 18% of aid and development programs will be transferred to the State Department. The announcement, made via a post on X, was one of Rubio's rare public statements on what has become a historic pivot away from U.S. foreign assistance, a transformation carried out by President Donald Trump's political appointees at the State Department alongside Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency DOGE teams. Expressing gratitude, Rubio acknowledged DOGE and our hardworking staff who worked long hours to achieve this overdue and historic reform in foreign aid.
January 6th, these are the hostages. approximately $1,500 for a pardon. Yes. Full pardon.
The move follows Trump's executive order on January 20th, which froze all foreign assistance funding and launched an exhaustive review of the tens of billions of dollars spent on U.S. aid and development abroad. Charging that much of the spending was wasteful and fueled a liberal agenda, Trump initiated a dramatic restructuring of America's global outreach. With the review officially concluded, Rubio's post confirmed the staggering results. An estimated 5,200 out of USAID's 6,200 programs have been eliminated. These programs spent tens of billions of dollars in ways that did not serve, and in some cases even harmed, the core national interests of the United States, Rubio declared. In consultation with Congress, we intend for the remaining 18% of programs we are keeping to be administered more effectively under the State Department, he continued. However, Democratic lawmakers and critics are already sounding the alarm, branding the move as unlawful. They argue that shutting down congressionally funded programs on this scale requires explicit approval from Congress. This battle may just be beginning. The U.S. scrambles to respond, and China is striking back harder than ever. Let us know your thoughts on these latest updates in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.